just like all I want is to just have fun. Live my life like a son of a gun. I could be 1,000 miles away, but still mean what I say. Then I woke up one morning, didn't recognize the man in the mirror. Then I laughed and I said, oh silly me, that's just me. Then I proceeded to not comb some stranger's hair, never was my style.
Right. Hello, welcome to the Politerotica Report, the loneliest echo chamber on the internet, coming at you live from the great northern mountain tops of the Rocky Mountain tops, armed and ready with the facts and logics and day drunk with ideas. Today we're going to be talking about the super duper sexy topic about voter suppression. So I know I'm wet too. It's just a very, very titillating topic. And I'm sure that you're very excited at the sheer thought of me talking about it. So thank you for watching. This is now a talk show, I guess, so accept it. We are trying to be a little bit funny, I guess. You can tell me if that's true or not. I'm not even gonna follow that up with a joke to prove myself. We're just gonna jump right in to the super serious topic of speaking of income inequality, finding one's identity, and etc. We're going to be stuffing classes of 30 to 40 children into classrooms in the next few weeks. This all under the assumption that schools can actually afford COVID measures, let alone abide by the measures. So the next story is, can a sitting president actually delay the election? And weirdly enough, the law is possible and viable for this particular situation, but it is... What kind of precedent does that set for due process and presidential authority? Many questions today, many more answers, I hope, at least, that we will provide. And I hope you, if you like content like this, just continue to watch it. So, can you imagine a world where your vote doesn't matter? And I'm sure a lot of you can imagine that sort of world. So, a voter suppression isn't gagging and bagging voters and shipping them off to undisclosed locations. Well, I hope that's not what that is overall. So, it's a little bit more clever than that, voter suppression. So maybe they make it hard at first. Maybe not too hard. Maybe it becomes boring or cumbersome. Overall time consuming. Something that you just associate with something that you don't want to do instead of your civic right, or something that you would feel very free and fun to exercise. Maybe next time you'll do it, or maybe next time the lines will be less, so, or maybe this time it doesn't matter so much, so I'll stay home, or I'll sit out, etc. Maybe next time seems to be the new thing. It's not just harder or farther away. A lot of times these people show up and they're not registered anymore. So maybe your district is being redrawn and you're finding out that you don't technically live in New Jersey anymore. You're registered in another state or another section of the city. And yeah, now you have to re-register as a Democrat because you can't vote right now. And that's really weird for a lot of people who drove all this way, took the time off work. And I know all of that seems like ancient problems of the distant past. And I'm just wondering, does anyone remember places or things, places, things? Does anyone remember these things? I feel very lost. So, absentee ballots are an integral part of the election machine, and I'm not talking about the outdated ATM-looking things, but the system actually created to cast and count your vote. This system has not changed for decades, but it's about to face countless unforeseen changes that may have unknown and unforeseen results. We can only hope this change that we've been seeing since about an uptake of voter suppression legislation being proposed since about 2008. So we can only hope that this will change since 2008, if you know what I'm implying. This is, we can hope, only a result of genuine concern of free and fair elections, but we know it's not. We can dream, can't we? Can have a little bit more hope. Otherwise, well, I guess that kind of leads me into my semi-promo segment, since I am a show that does not have sponsors yet. So consider joining TYT membership, daily content, member exclusive content. It's all ad-free, except I still watch it with the ads for some sick, sadistic reason. It's not just about what you get with subscribing to these people. It's about providing independent financial support for news organizations for people that don't have the kinds of corporate ties that we will be talking about today. And if you don't like TYT, or if you don't like what they have to say or how they say it, it's they're still doing the heavy lifting and a lot of the hard work. So if you don't really like jank, you can still show your partisanship, eat your words, and donate to a cause that'll help both right-wing people and left-wing people alike, because free and fair elections are kind of for all of us, and Medicare for all, but oh yeah, when you say freedom for all men, we know, and they know, that comes with a hidden caveat. So it's safe to assume that they don't really know how to include all people when they talk about all things, such as freedom for all lives matter. They just don't seem to get the concept of all. So I'm a little bit tired of talking now because there was a lot of words. So I'm just gonna put in a quick break. I will be right back. Okay, so we are back, I guess, breaking into the second part of my video thingy, I guess we're gonna call it. It's not gonna be live, but I'm filming it as if it's a live stream. So we're gonna be breaking the stigma of voting being super clinical and boring. Let me just move my microphone real quick. Yeah. So we're going to be breaking the stigma of voting being very clinical and very boring. So dealing with the government earned a reputation for being lengthy and very cumbersome work, things that the citizens don't really want to do and should not concern themselves with. Voting is no different than that. The long lines, the registration, it becomes something that, if not really familiar and accustomed to, becomes really daunting very quickly, especially if you don't have a printer at home. Why does this seem hard all of a sudden? And why is it meant to be harder? These are all questions that we're going to be answering today. Voter suppression is the act of making voting harder, and it takes time to do this, since I guess only the last 4 or 5 election cycles have really seen an uptake of this. So over time, for those in areas that have less polling locations, longer lines, stricter regulations, all things that we will explain and explore soon, but these are all strategically put in place in strategic places to affect voter turnout. Voting rights are being attacked nationwide, and as states propose and pass voter suppression laws, these laws force significant difficulties towards eligible voters trying to exercise their greatest fundamental and constitutional right, since rights existing at all. It is one of the only rights that truly matters in a way. So since 2008, states across the country have legislated criteria to make it harder for Americans, particularly disenfranchised Black Americans, elderly, working students, and people with disabilities, to exercise this fundamental right to stand in a really long line leading into an elementary school gymnasium for 4 hours on a hot Tuesday night. Or it won't be hot, you know what I mean, muggy. November's never a fun month for anybody, and it doesn't help that every 4 years, November's a very, very stressful part of the year. This is the freedom that the government was created to protect, and the freedom that your Uncle Sam is carpet bombing Iraqis to protect as well. So be super grateful. Remember, be very grateful for that right that they are actively trying to take away from you, yet simultaneously using that as their reason to intervene in occupied territory. So, on a rainy Wednesday, usually, or Tuesday, weekday, something like that, you pile into a room, line up, either analog style with a pencil and paper, or if you can afford it, or if your state can afford it, a half-broken voting machine. See, voter funding isn't necessarily federal, and states need to fund their own voting efforts alongside federal funding that is often scarce or non-existent. So, some states have modern technology, and other states rely on broken, hand-me-down machines from literally the Bush era. The Bank of America ATM-looking kind of New Jersey strip mall club machines, they don't work. They're very dirty, and they have restrictive standards that include early voting. So, in a lot of cases, these machines are just there to be touched and pressed and put your grubby fingers all over. So, we're gonna pass. A lot of people are gonna pass on that this November, and that's not good. Not good at all. Voter ID laws and purges of voter rolls are also something that you should be acutely aware of. Purging, meaning if you moved or didn't vote in a certain election, registered to change parties, your ballot may have actually already been purged in 2017. Doesn't hurt to check that out, especially this time around, especially if you're one of those weirdos that decided to sit out last election. So I bet you are spending each night in sweats of regret. The proof is in the numbers, I guess. This information is all according to the ACLU, so I'm no Kellyanne Conway pollster. Both my eyes face the same direction, so I'm not sure if I'm reading the same information that the GOP is, and in essence being fed to Trump over the last few years, so I'm sorry if I may be misinterpreting the truth as what it is. 70% of Georgia's voters were actually purged in 2018, and the ones that were purged were Black. Georgia is a predominantly Black state with a rich history of, you guessed it, racism. Also has a vibrantly Democratic voter base despite being in a red state. It's one of those notorious swing states that is purple, or at least turning purple. Hillary, back in the Hillary team, tried to reform these voter lines and still lost. I guess voter lines, if you're familiar with the term gentrification, I'm sorry, not gentrification, gerrymandering, very similar G words. So if you're familiar with the term gerrymandering, we're not going to go into that today, but they have lines and you vote around the lines. And so sometimes people try to come in and then redraw those lines in favor of their own political power. Hillary tried to do this, much like a lot of Republicans also tried to do as well, but she failed, and they lost because it was a cheap effort to win the vote, not actually to gain a critical voice for the state and to get their voice heard. So here's a quote. "We were meant to be distracted by racial and cultural division, but Georgia has moved beyond that," he said, "and the coalition that has already being built statewide right now transcends race, transcends urban and suburban rural divides, and transcends regionalism. And we are seeing that play out across the South." This is John Ossoff, a Democratic senator from Georgia. I guess a Democratic senator from Georgia is what I was gonna say. Okay. Anyways, so he's a nice guy, I guess. Very interesting fellow. He's a young senator, not very much older than you or I probably watching. But I do starkly disagree with his thoughts on Medicare for all, for a clear reason we don't really want to get into today, because it's not really relevant to what we're talking about. But there is a lot of young politicians out there aiming to convert purple states and realizing how important it is to do so. Another quote is, a plan that is comprehensive and gives people more choices. A plan that allows both private insurers and the federal government to compete for folks' trust is the quote that I didn't agree with him on Medicare for all, because why should the states and the government be competing with the public option? That's not really what we want, but I'm okay with you being on our side. So that is our quote from this young man. I'm gonna take another quick break because I'm a little tired of talking again. So just be right back. Take a look into John Ossoff. Some upsetting things have happened to him lately. Some ads have come out and they enlarged his nose. The GOP propaganda people decided to put out very anti-Semitic ad in regards to him. So go show your support to him and his political efforts, because they are being really mean to him. Well, not mean, they're being fucking racist. So I will be right back. All right, we are back again after I had my snacks. So yeah. Thanks for tuning in. Today's topic is the wonderful topic of voter suppression. As the election creeps in closer and closer, many scramble to get their attempts to get their absentee ballot in time, and the deadline for many states is actually recommended to be August 1st. So if you have already been scrambling to get your ballot, you might as well start scrambling now, because it is June 30th or June 31st? I have no idea what day it is. I haven't known what day it is since like February. I'm sure you can relate to that. So get out there and vote. This story, all of these stories are according to the ACLU, so mind you, I'm not an expert on voting. I didn't just come up with all these thoughts on my own. According to the ACLU, across the country, 1 in 13 Black Americans can't vote right now due to disenfranchisement laws aimed directly at them in vulnerable states, vulnerable counties, etc. This is as simple as someone... Okay. My teleprompter was going while I was on the break, so I was reading the wrong sentence. So I'm gonna go back. Okay, so across the country, 1 in 13 Black Americans can't actually vote due to disenfranchisement laws. This is as simple as denying someone entrance to a voter area because they smell like weed or because they smell like booze, to as extreme as limiting access to voting based on religious clothing. There has been many legislation proposed, even in Canada, that says that you can't vote if you're wearing like a hijab or something, or if you're wearing a burqa, or if you're wearing something that might obscure your face. And so nowadays, laws like that might be a little bit problematic because a lot of us are, in fact, covering our faces in order to show ID, because we just hope and trust in the systems and the things in place and the people checking our IDs and being like, yeah, well, your eyes look the same. So we can just trust people, hopefully, if that's good enough. And then maybe the system that's been in place for decades to count votes and to make sure that they all came from the right places does its job. We can only hope. And that's not the most, that's probably not the most hopeful statement of today. It can only be, I guess, as broad as making polling stations crowded or making them unwelcoming places. That's another example of voter suppression. 1/3 of voters who have a disability report difficulty voting. This can be it can vary based on your disability, and if it's visual or if it's debilitating. Only 40% of polling places nationwide actually fully accommodate people with disabilities that are related to mobility, meaning that they have to plan their trip a lot more before actually getting there. So without help, a lot of people with these disabilities rely on absentee ballots, like strategically, because they are friggin' unable to get there in time. Or let's say another scenario, they get all the way there, they're registered, they do everything, and it finds out that maybe the polling place moved. And that happened to a few people. I can't remember the story off the top of my head because I'm speaking verbatim right now, but I think it was probably like either the 2008 election or the 2012 election. I'll look that up and I'll post it on my Instagram if I can find it. But yes, there was a story of a person, they get all the way there and then they're denied because, well, the polling place isn't there anymore. The signs have moved, they're at a different place. And that happens to so many people, and you know where it happens? It happens in places where it's very important for people to vote in a timely manner. Otherwise, their day that they've taken off is wasted. Across the counties with greater minority populations have less polling sites and poll workers per voter. That's also a huge problem. This aligns with a lack of federal funding, the lack of state funding, and low-income communities self-supporting these voting efforts. It's kind of a little bit hopeless to assume that these communities can actually afford to hire enough people to actually accommodate all of the people coming in to vote, let alone accommodating them in a safe way in today's climate. 6 in 10 college students come from out of state in New Hampshire, the state trying to actually bar residents with out of state's driver licenses from voting. New Hampshire is also a huge swing state. Here is a link down in the description area, I guess, in regards to that. If you want to look a little bit more into that, we're going to be moving into the part 2 of our section of the video about voter suppression, and that is access issues. Access creates a particular barrier for disabled voters. Registration difficulties, may come up from that. They may actually disenfranchise disabled people more through inadequate access provisions, which literally just, in layman's terms, they ain't got ramps. No ramps. So how the hell is Grandma gonna wheel herself up a flight of stairs to the upstairs library? In Canada, I've noticed that most of the voting stations take place in places like gymnasiums or elementary schools, college campuses, places that already have a lot of access. So I can't imagine a world where you wouldn't have a voting place just in a nice flat area where everyone can get to. Sorry. So for instance, the United Kingdom, the UK for short, the electoral register is updated annually largely by paper-based processes. This provides poor accessibility to people with visual or learning impairments. While in the US, the dependence on outdated electronic voting machines is actually tough to access for a lot of people in wheelchairs or a scooter, not to mention the tech comprehension needed for this. Older generations typically have a lot of trouble with even the machine at the local McDonald's, so can you expect Granny to pick the right name off of a list that is already very confusing and not... We can already talk about how the ballots are written as one thing, and that's not what we're talking about today, but if you've ever seen a voter ballot for counties that have a lot of different runners, it's very confusing because there's a lot of things that they have to check if they're not aware and they're just coming in and they want to vote Trump. They want to vote Trump and that's it. They might be a little confused by it because there's a little bit more steps than that, Granny. But I'm sure that she's been doing it for a long period of time, but back then they just had paper. Now it's all these machines and they're afraid of machines. And those machines are scary because they break and they're not accurate. So on one hand, we have voting machines that just, straight up don't work in a lot of cases. And then we have paper ballots that I'm familiar with and have voted with a few times. The paper ballots are hard for people to see, but you can just print them bigger and then give them to them. And that fixes it. But with the voting machines, you have to have voting machines that are lower to the ground, and ones that are lower to the ground might not be as accommodating for people that are higher to the ground. It's just so many different things could be solved if you just had a paper ballot like we do in Canada. I don't know that much about how efficient it is. I'm just saying it's probably cheaper, and the states would equally be able to afford it. So the lack of private, accessible voting booths makes postal voting inappropriate for others with specific and physical disabilities that pertain to not being able to see. So people that walk around with an interpreter or somebody who has to be with them in order to comprehend, tasks that are stimuli that's coming in, those caretakers are not permitted to help these people vote. So in a lot of cases, these people have opinions, they have ideas, and they want to vote or support people in their community, and they simply can't because there are laws in place that say that anyone who helps those people out is committing voter fraud. You've probably heard that term a lot before. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that means, but keep that in your mind that not everybody committing voting fraud might necessarily be in it to sway the election. They might just be helping out a friend or a family member and figured out that that's not something that they're supposed to do. There must be sufficient polling stations to minimize this queuing, which, discriminates against those with mobility or pain, fatigue-related impairments. So in 2005, 68% of polling stations in the UK were potentially inaccessible to disabled voters. This is not just a US problem, clearly, but one that is, something that disabled people face everywhere. It's something that we should probably fix here, there, everywhere. Legs are required for, what's that word again? Yes, voting. Another problem is equipment. Polling stations must be clearly signposted, low to the ground. Polling booths and voting equipment must be available even when we've seen that it's not available in these places. Equipment must be, must enable independent voting by visually and or physically impaired voters. But in 2005, 30% of UK polling stations were not in compliance with that law that requires large print ballots or a physical template. Something that I've seen in Canada, not being denied. I mean, I've just seen bigger ballots being handed to people. This is, it's particularly funny to think about a blind person voting. I know it's kind of a little bit insensitive, but would they ever really know? Like, would you ever really know? I guess we don't ever really know, but would they ever really know? Another problem is staff. So staff must understand the necessity of taking steps to ensure access and to be able to show voters how to use this equipment, such as, the physical templates, as well as using disability etiquette to avoid patronizing voters and making them feel like little baby children. What does this accomplish, you ask? Voter suppression and all these weird little things that we've been talking about. Like, why would they do that? You're probably wondering, why would they do that? That seems silly. Seems like a lot of effort. And I'll tell you why they do that, because it's actually kind of effective. We know that voting has an effect on who wins an election. It's kind of what we hope voting is for. We also think that, I guess voting decides what color the little map lights up on election day. There's red and there's blue, and we've stated actually recently there's been a larger influx of purple states. So purple. I have trouble. Purple. I just like to say it that way. Purple. So purple states have increased since 2004 and on to about 2012. There's no I guess no coincidence that there is a rise in states proposed to have voter suppression laws that are also purple. So laws that have been created sorry, I'm like losing my train of thought. So these laws are created in areas that are very vulnerable, let's just say. So with the gap being smaller and voter turnout at a record high, after 2008 election, states with that large kind of gap or that large turnout enacted these new laws. Some laws have passed, while others have not, fallen flat on their face, etc. What doesn't need a legislative hand in all of this is the social stigma that electoral fatigue and political burnout has. So we don't really need to fund it or actually actively suppress people with the want and need to vote in a climate where people are just genuinely fatigued about dealing with the government and they just don't want to. They don't have to pay for that, so that's probably pretty cool. I don't know if that last part made sense, because my teleprompter was going a little bit quick, so I had to like skip a few words in my rhetoric. I'm gonna take another quick break. I will be right back with the topic of burnout and what that means and what we can do to combat it and get our fire back in our bellies about politics. Oh no, I forgot to unmute my mic after the last break. So I have to read that sentence a third time. So there is no coincidence that there is a rise in the states that have proposed voter suppression laws. So it started once the gap between voter turnout became so obviously, racially classified between the right and the left, with the gap being smaller and voter turnout at a record high after the 2008 election. With that high turnout, they enacted these new laws. Some have passed, while others have not. And of course, like we spoke about before the break and before I had to record this sentence a third time for some reason, they're doing this for clear reasons. I'm sick and tired of talking about it. So we're going to talk about burnout, because I'm experiencing it this very second. The 5 states with the highest rates of voter turnout in 2008 were, and we're going to explain a little bit of interesting facts about each one of these states. So Minnesota proposed legislation and a constitutional amendment that would prevent already registered voters from voting unless they provide a government-issued photo ID with a current address. Many people do not have updated addresses from maybe their parents' home, or they're away currently in school. This affected those people. This was in 2011, leading up to the famous 2012 election cycle as well. So then we lead into Wisconsin. More recently, this year, Daniel Kelly, a conservative justice on the state Supreme Court, lost his seat to Jill Karofsky, a liberal challenger, by more than... I'm so weird at reading numbers. I don't know why I can't read that number. A lot of numbers. While the Supreme Court seat was decided last year, literally by only 6,000 votes. So there's a lot of effort being put there more recently to suppress their votes, because we showed up, okay? We showed up this year, and they're like, oh my gosh, they're doing it, and I don't want it. There are efforts proposed by the Republicans to suppress at-home voting, thinking that if they reduce resources or make the lines really long, that people would just stay home. And it turns out they did, and they voted against them at home. In record numbers. Literally, the gap was so large, I had trouble reading it because I'm a dyslexic weirdo that has trouble with numbers. So now there is a conversation created almost artificially by this. Is voting from home safe? As if George Bush himself didn't literally promote the shit out of it in 2004. For military people. Leads us into Maine. Yet again, more recently, and targeting out the demographic, not just Democrats. It's like they're carving out an entire demographic of people. This bill would require increased scrutiny of voters who list a college dorm as their residence. So college students who live in Maine have the right to vote in Maine, and that should not be subject to different laws than anyone else. So if you live in Maine, you should be able to vote in Maine. But they made a law that if you have a ID that says you don't live in Maine, then sorry, guess you don't actually live in Maine. Idiots. You thought you lived in Maine, and then you worked in Maine, and then you sleep in Maine every day. No. So legislators should definitely vote no on LD 155. So it's a bad law. Speaking of bad laws, we got New Hampshire. And we spoke about the efforts in New Hampshire pretty recently, but let's, with that being said, they're all just one example, not the entire story of all these things and these working pieces to go on to suppress the vote. Especially, they're strategically suppressing the votes in places that are vulnerable to, party splitting and to going from maybe right to left. That's the only real places they're doing it. Colorado, only 5 states all have all male voting systems, and Colorado is one of those states. There are only 211 days until the general election at the time that I wrote this article. The November election is on the 3rd. Colorado is one of the states that has ready, easily accessible voting because of the funding and accessibility that they have. They have a lot of resources they can pull from. They have lots of machines. They both have machines. They both have the paper. They have everything. They're not reliant on just one aspect of voting. They're also not reliant on one aspect of funding as well. That's why voter turnout is always so good in Colorado, and that's why it's always so easy. And the people in Colorado are much like the people in Canada, where they're like, why would I have a problem with voting? It's only going to be like an hour. People in the South, people in Georgia are like, I do not want to go back there. If you make me go back there, I will cut you. So all 5 of these states that we talked about introduced voter suppression laws, though some passed, some fall on their face. It just kind of depends on how many votes the bills get. So you vote for the people who write and pass bills, and those bills propose bills. So those people propose bills to make it harder for you to vote for them, or in essence, for you to vote them out. It's not about your safety at this point or fraud. It's kind of about their power and keeping their power away from you as regular schmuck voters who might actually not live in Maine, which is a crime. I don't care if you don't believe me, because this is my show, and I'm just, these are my thoughts, and you can make your own show with your own thoughts, with your own logic, and your own facts. Voter suppression after record voter turnout in 2008. More than 30 states actually introduced voter suppression legislation in 2011. 16 states actually passed such measures. So, let's imagine a world. Yeah, okay. A lot of people voted. Great. That must be a lie. It's fraud. It's fake. Like, what? Democracy, right? Am I right? It's hard to go back and relive all of this for you as I watched all of these conversations unfold in real time as if there was an actual problem with this record turnout and that there's something that needed to be done about it. So the conversation about voter fraud is fairly new. Now, there is countless acts of actual voter fraud, and there are lots of acts of credit card fraud too, but the government doesn't ban credit cards. Like we just trust in the system that we've created to investigate and prosecute credit card fraud. Yeah, sure, it happens, but the people that do it are most likely caught, at least hopefully. The perpetrators aren't put on a public database for you to look through though, but that would be as remarkably resourceful for the public. So take a gander without really looking at every single instance of voter fraud in this convenient PDF created by the United States government and many other PDFs of similar nature, databases of similar nature, without looking at every single instance of voter fraud that has happened since 2004. The majority are poll workers mishandling information, or instances where a citizen was unaware that they were breaking or committing fraud, such as being in possession of someone else's ballot or assisting someone else to fill out their ballot. This is actually kind of funny because I was looking for a few hours actually at this database. It's quite interesting to see how many mothers are on this list, along with those pleading guilty. They plead guilty, yes, because they're guilty. They realize, I committed fraud. Doesn't mean I committed fraud. Like, I want to bring down democracy as we know it. No, like they understand they did something wrong and they're not going to do it again. And that wrong thing happened to be helping their disabled peer vote, or maybe helping their son do it for the first time, or looking where they shouldn't be looking, doing something they shouldn't be doing. And it's not that deep, bro. Okay. So why this is so important to have, well-regulated, well-organized polling stations with trained staff on a very centralized level with federal funding, or at least a nice flow of funding that keeps everybody on the same page, keeps everyone well informed about what they should and shouldn't be looking at, and then we'd probably have a lot less instances of voter fraud instead of making more regulations that will, in essence, create more instances of voter fraud because you make a law, right? People aren't breaking that law before you make it. And then you make the law, and then people start breaking the law. And then you're like, oh my gosh, we have all this crime, but we didn't have that crime before you made the law. If you catch what I mean. So if these thousands, millions of cases of voter fraud are related to absentee ballots, why are we saying they're so safe? Why am I being like, hey, go vote from home, commit some fraud? Why? Well, why do you think that it's unsafe? What makes you think that? Where did you get that idea? A lot of these cases happened, back in 2004 and onward, and we've had a conversation kind of revolving around the boogeyman of fraud. So fraud, as a general term, is not a scary word. It's a category of crime. There are countless instances of insurance fraud. And how do we solve that? We didn't get rid of insurance, so we can't just make it really hard for people to get insured, because first of all, obviously, it's important for people to get insured for things, and elections are also important for people to vote in. There are also huge capitalist empires where money equals speech that are inhibiting our free access to free and fair elections. But I'm not talking about that, are we? We're just talking about the for voter fraud of the potential illegal immigrants that might be living in Maine, that might not actually be from Maine. Sorry, I'm just really on the Maine thing, because mainly it's just weird. So close to Canada, I just can't imagine all these Canadians coming in requesting an absentee ballot to vote. Ooh, that's not what we're doing, okay? There's people that live and work in other states that, God, I digress. In the US, a campaign is financed by donations, contributions, PACs, and firms meant to fund and ensure the success of the campaign. When these resources of wealth all have an idea, maybe to preserve their electoral power, maybe that's their collective idea, limiting access to voting for people likely to vote against them is a very simple strategy, but it's not as foolproof as they once thought. It's actually working to drive up engagement in a lot of these states due to bored Canadians like me telling you voting is very easy experience once you actually get there and actually do it. It's never really too far away from home, because now you can vote from home just like you can work from home and eat from home and do all these other things from home. You just got to make sure that you get your freaking ballot on time, because this is what we're talking about. There's so many barriers in place to get you away from where you want to be, and you don't want to be trapped in that. Now, do you? No, you don't. So register. Voter registration is the next topic. Barriers to vote or voter registration make it harder for Americans to participate in our lovely democracy. Makes them tired, makes them bored. So we've answered what voter suppression is. And now what can we do about it? We've outlined problems. What can we do actively to stop them? Voter suppression is a strategy used to influence the outcome of an election by discouraging or preventing specific groups, people from voting. When this happens, there is really not much left to do other than like comply when notions are passed, and you gotta vote against them. And those people who propose them, it means knowing who processes these ideas into the world's discourse. Like, who is coming up with these ideas? Who's promoting them? Are they on our side? Are they Democrats? We should know who these people are, where they are, and when to vote against them in instances like this. So we've talked about the 4 or 5 states where these laws are strategically implemented or proposed. So pay attention to those areas, and you can do yourself and everybody else a favor to vote against them in local elections, because there's not just federal elections that happen every 4 years. There's things happening locally that literally are passing these sorts of laws. They're local laws, state laws. Trust your instincts and take a look at what's going on. Okay, take a look at it. I want to take a quick break because I'm a little bit tired of talking right now, but it doesn't really look like I have a break planned in this paragraph. Okay, so back to the fraud subject. It means knowing who proposes these laws about fraud and actually going to your local government and voting against them. Many cases of it are present. And in conclusion, oh my gosh, why is the sentence so fucked up? I just wanted to read like normalies, but anyway, so I'm just going to keep talking about normal things. So you just keep hearing the term voter suppression, but they don't really explain what it means. I'm sorry, you keep hearing the word voter fraud. I've explained what voter suppression is, but the reason why they do that is because of voter fraud. They think that there's these actors out here, these people that are trying to control the election in some way by voting too many times or doing things like that. So they reference these many cases of documented voter fraud, which we've talked about, do exist, but they're not necessarily the narrative that they want to push, that there's people out there literally trying to influence the outcome of the election. There's just people that are having trouble maybe understanding the rules of voting and in essence committing a crime or committing fraud. Though each case has been documented so far isn't to say people aren't actually doing it, maybe unnoticed, or maybe in ways that we can't even currently comprehend. So perhaps your vote being disenfranchised by a grandmother helping her grandson vote, or maybe it's a corporation legally bribing legislators to pass policy in favor of their company's needs. Who knows? Which seems like it has more of an impact on the outcome of the country. So they sell this idea that your voice doesn't matter because the fraud and the regulations that are here to protect you are all going to do all the heavy lifting and the hard work and the bad stuff for you. That is where the case, that if that was the case, we would not need to fight so hard to get an amendment for the Constitution that writes money out of our elections or money out of politics. If this whole thing was literally just about making sure every individual has the sovereign right to vote and that their vote matters and that the elections are free and fair, then the conversation would be very different. We wouldn't be having a conversation of restricting disenfranchised people from voting. We'd be having a conversation about who actually controls our elections. And let me tell you, it's not your grandma helping her disabled grandson to vote for the first time, and then realizing that by seeing his ballot, therefore committed fraud. So of course she's going to she's guilty. Yeah, I mean, and then it gets in the database, adds to the other case of voter fraud for Tucker Carlson to go onto his show and be like, oh my gosh, look at all these people. They're trying to ruin our elections. When really, the corporations are the ones trying to, like, put a hammer in the elections. We're not talking about that now, are we? Out of the pockets, I guess, of the corporations and into the state treasury for voter resources. Now that would be a step towards making elections free and fair again. Not a peep from the GOP on that point. Before Corona, Tucker decided to get it like a spray tan and all these things to get all this new confidence to finally go out and say all of those really weird things about coronavirus that kind of came out of left field, so to speak, but not left field because the right's dumb. And of course it was suspicious at first when they were talking about safety of people and others. I guess something had to be up about it, but so there's always an angle to everything that they bring you. So yeah, there are documented cases of voter fraud. Take a look at what the documented cases are, instead of just listening to the scary fact of there are so many cases of voter fraud in the United States. Like, they're documented, and you can take a look at them on the local database. Look at them, look at the cases, and then realize that a lot of them aren't actually scary, illegal Russian spies coming in to thwart the democracy. Like, realistically, it's a lot simpler than that. And when you find out it's a lot simpler than that, you realize how fundamentally disingenuous that Fox News is and how horrible the fake news machine truly is. Because if you just really look at the numbers, they speak for themselves. We are not out here to make it easier for fraudsters to vote. That's not really the plan. Or, I guess, dead people to get out here and vote. For them, I guess, it's oh so dangerous illegal immigrants who, in fact, are going to be infecting the policy of the country that they reside in. Okay, so we have the scary illegal immigrants that they don't like coming in because they live here. I mean, they live here, they pay taxes, they work here, they sleep here. Just saying. And they technically, I mean, this is just my opinion, have just as much of a right to vote as Barbara from Minnesota, who lives in her private island in Chile, just as much as, I guess does she have just as much of a right to vote in a country that she doesn't live in anymore, as a person that lives in a country that vote in a country that they do live in? I don't know. Kind of on a strange tangent here. Not sure if I'm making much sense. Those scary voting fraudsters are usually caught because of the complex system created to protect your rights and anonymity, and I'm sure more regulation would help suppress that. But admittedly, at what cost? You tell me what the cost is. But that's, I guess, you tell me what the cost is for that. The cost is literally, like we discussed, probably your personal right to vote, or make it easy to vote, or have a fun experience voting. It shouldn't be a horrible experience like going to the TSA or getting in a plane. Voting should just, you trust the system, you trust the things that are in place that keep your vote safe, that get your ballot there. I mean, we've been doing it in Canada for a very long time. Thank you for tuning in for that specific aspect of everything today. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground with voter suppression. I know it's probably not the most tantalating subject that I've ever covered, and I have trouble reading on such a fast teleprompter. I just changed the background from white to black. It's a little bit easier to see, but now I'm getting a little dizzy. It's been going by oh so fast. So thank you for tuning in. This has been Politerotica of my report show. see you next week. If you like content like this, continue to watch it because I like to make it. It's a lot easier to make because I'm reading it all off of a thing, and there's not going to be a lot of editing to do after this. So, yeah. Have a spooky rest of your day, all right?
Bye, and I don't love you. Anyone else who's watching this though, I love you so much. Mwah.